Hello, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is Aftermath of Murder, Survivor Stories, a multi-part video series featuring exclusive interviews with ordinary people who have experienced an extraordinary event, the devastating loss of a loved one through murder. This series goes behind the headlines as survivors share their stories about the loss, grief, trauma, and hope for healing in the aftermath of murder. Joining us today for part 3 in our series is Cristina Pastia, who in 2009 lost both her parents to murder while on a trip to their home country of Romania. So I know this is a little bit of a tough interview for you, so thanks for coming on and sharing.
No worries.
So the details behind your parents' murder are a little bit up in the air. Could you tell me about that?
They went to Romania in 2009 to sell what had been my mom's apartment, and they were supposed to be there for 3 weeks. And on the last day, they were found dead in the apartment. And then ultimately, I found out that the Romanian police thought that it had been a murder-suicide. So my mom was murdered, and my dad apparently killed himself.
And that wasn't true, or?
The frustrating part about it is that I don't know. So on one hand, I knew my dad. I knew my parents' relationship. I knew what we were like as a family. I remember them as people who would do anything for each other and for me, and who never settled arguments with violence. Right. Yeah.
So it didn't feel like it was an abusive home. It didn't feel like it.
But then on the other hand, if I'm saying no, I know him, it couldn't possibly be true. Well, that's not evidence. So I'm kind of left with trying to figure out what happened, and then because I don't know, it gets very confusing. So I deal with it one way. If it was a murder-suicide, I deal with it differently if it, if my dad found her, right, and then killed himself. And there were all sorts of weird things that didn't fit.
Cristina, tell me a little bit about the day you found out your parents were murdered.
It was a Saturday. It was the day my parents were supposed to come back from the airport. So me and a family friend were supposed to drive in and get them. He calls at around noon, and we were supposed to go at 4. So he's 4 hours early. And when I found out he's there, the first words out of my mouth are, "But the apartment's not clean. My parents are going to be so angry at me because the apartment's not clean." And I don't even know what that must have felt like for him, because he already knew and he was coming to tell me. And it didn't really occur to me that something was wrong, not even when I opened the door to see that many people, until I looked at my friends. I basically grown up with them, and they weren't smiling. And that's when I realized that something was off. And I guess they told me that my parents weren't coming back, and all I really remember is kind of backing into a corner. I don't remember how I got from opening the door to the corner, but somehow that happened.
Obviously it was shock.
Yeah. It sounds terrible, but I didn't really cry all day. But I talked to my uncle on the phone that night, and he says they think it's a murder-suicide, and I just lost it completely. I think the first words out of my mouth were, "Are they stupid?" Like, that's, and then they just hung up the phone, just started bawling, just completely lost it. It was kind of scary.
How did you really put yourself back together to get on to the very next day?
I just started making plans right away. I needed to not just sit there.
Tell me a little bit about the support that you received from your friends.
My close friends are good. It was really hard for everybody because I had no idea what I wanted or needed. They obviously had no idea what to do either. They were great, and I know I was pretty frustrating to deal with at that time.
When we spoke prior to the interview, you discussed a certain feeling of resentment about people helping you.
No, everybody.
Why? I mean, they didn't murder your parents.
No, but they had parents. Or still have parents. And I'm mostly over this now, but it was really, really difficult at the beginning. If anyone I spoke to would you know, they had a fight with their parents, so they want to complain about it because, wow, their dad's just being so frustrating, or their mom just doesn't understand them, and it was really hard for me to sit there and listen to that because you'll get over it. I can't. Like the first time I went like grocery shopping after my parents died, I went to Costco with my friend's family, and just all I could notice were all the other families, and it was just so, I don't know, it was a weird mix of envy and anger, and it just, the whole thing made my skin crawl. I used to get very angry too when people would start asking about, especially in the beginning, about holidays or family in general, and depending on my mood, I'd either just avoid the topic or say something really blunt. That made them feel very uncomfortable.
I have to ask you about the orphan jokes.
Yeah.
You make them.
Yeah, it's how I deal with things. I make sarcastic comments about not having parents, and it makes me feel better. Because if I can joke about something, it's not such a big deal.
But is that masking the truth of your grief? Or is it just because you don't want to have a 2-hour conversation?
I think it's that I need the acknowledgement sometimes, either from a very select few other people, or myself, that something really awful has happened and I need to not pretend it didn't. But I don't want to have some sort of draining, like you said, emotional 2-hour conversation about all my feelings and every time.
How long after you found out your parents were murdered did it take you to figure out that you needed help?
Oh, what kind of help?
I don't know, what kind of help have you had?
The first guy I went to stared at me blankly for an hour.
Didn't understand murder?
Just did not know how to deal with me, apparently. Just didn't have a clue. Just stared at me blankly, and I think waited and counted the minutes until the hour was over and he could go deal with someone with less scary problems. I don't know. And then the second time I did the whole counseling thing, I went to a woman who was, she told me to go to a psychic, and that didn't work so well with me.
So when you got to, I guess, some group help, was that through the BC Victims of Homicide?
Well, the funny thing about that was that I'd noticed they were looking for, they had job postings on Craigslist. And I sent them an email and said, I can't actually apply for this, but do you need a volunteer? And I told them a bit about what happened to my parents, and they're like, so we're doing a support group. Maybe this would be of interest to you? And they kind of had to prod me to do it, but I eventually did. And that was definitely the best experience I had with any sort of help.
Why?
I think what I wanted more than anything else was just to talk to other people who can say that they understand this. Because I didn't know anyone else who did. And that was very isolating. It's kind of a weird way to explain it, but it was an 8-week group. And the first couple of times it was really helpful, but I didn't feel like I really connected with everybody else. And what finally helped with that was when I got a question that I had to answer, and it was, what was the most frustrating thing anybody has ever said to you? And I just looked at that and went, really, just one? And everyone could relate to that. And it's a little superficial, but they understand.
What were some of the frustrating things people said to you?
One I really enjoyed was a week after my parents died. It was an accident. Please move on. That was great. Some aren't malicious. Some are just kind of unintentional. People aren't thinking.
You had said in our discussion that somebody had said to you that your dad did it. Just move on. That was less funny. That just makes me angry. At this point, with the evidence I've seen, I don't think I can conclusively say that. So it's very frustrating
to hear from people that they can very easily put this in a box and move on.
It's almost finding that normal.
Yeah.
Almost making meaning out of it. Can you?
I think I can try to use that experience to be useful to other people, but I don't know if I can really say there's some sort of meaning behind it.
I wanted to ask you, you've got a particularly unique opinion about the kind of pastel-y website, victim website kind of stuff out there. Share that with the audience.
What I wanted to do after my parents died was find a way to deal with it, find a roadmap, basically. So I used to Google a lot. I tried to find a lot of information, and I got a lot of these really nice kind of therapy voice pastel websites that talk about how you'll have hope eventually and how you'll eventually come to accept what happened. You'll learn to live with what happened. And that's nice. I mean, it genuinely is that they want to tell you it's not over, that you have something to look forward to, that your life will not be a complete miserable wreck because of what happened. But in doing this, they completely gloss over the ugly parts. And it's ugly. And then you feel like there's something wrong because you're not slowly, sadly, but surely moving towards
healing.
Yeah. You feel like you're supposed to be on this trail and you are way off over here in the woods by yourself.
You've got strong opinions.
Yeah.
If you or someone you know has experienced a loss through homicide, go to the BC Victims of Homicide website at bcvoh.com to find available resources and information on upcoming support groups. If you're interested in volunteering or to make a donation, visit the BC Bereavement Helpline website. And to reach both by phone, call 604-738-9950 or toll free 1-877-779-2223. This has been Aftermath of Murder Survivor Stories.